Hello and welcome to France 24. My guest is Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
From Davos. You said many times, Tony Blair, that Brexit was a mistake. You wrote recently the British public deserved a new chance to vote again. What makes you think that the result of the vote would be different?
Because I think when we voted to leave Europe in June 2016, okay, we voted to leave Europe, but we didn't yet know the terms of the new arrangements with Europe. So part of what this year will express is what those new terms are going to be. And my point is very simple. We have the right to think again once we have a comparison that we can make between what we have with the European Union now and what we will have with the new relationship the government negotiates. And once that happens, then you're in a completely different situation. I mean, June 2016 was like having an election in which the question is, do you like the government? Right? If that was the question, in most elections, governments would fail. But the real question in an election is, do you prefer this government to the potential government? Okay. That's what we will be able to see in the course of this year.
Do you think that the referendum was a sham?
No, it wasn't a sham. It was a perfectly legitimate expression of opinion. It's just that necessarily it was an expression of opinion without the alternative to present European Union membership yet having been negotiated. So
what should be done? You think a referendum or an election?
So the first thing is really, do we have the right to think again? So the campaign that we're launching in the UK at the moment is, we have the right to think again. You know, democracy didn't stop in June 2016. As this negotiation unfolds, as we see what we get, we've got the right to assess it and decide. You can decide in any number of different ways. That's a second-order question. The first-order question is, do you have the right to think again?
Yeah, Nigel Farage thinks that if there were another vote, the victory of the Leave would be the same.
So he may be right, in which case he should support another chance to think. But I personally think...
I think he does, but...
well, it's not clear whether he does or he doesn't, but the truth of the matter is, you know, obviously that doesn't mean to say we will vote to stay if we get the chance. But we should have the right to compare the future that we will now know, this is what the future looks like, with what we have at the moment. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we have learned.
Isn't it too late? That's done.
No, it's not too late. We don't leave until March 2019. Up until that point, we've got the right to rethink. And remember what we know now that we didn't know back then. I mean, for example, we were told if we voted to leave Europe, we were going to get an immediate £350 million a week into our healthcare system. We now know we're actually getting less money into our healthcare system. So, you know, there's a lot that we've learned since the referendum.
Right, but Corbyn and Theresa May, they don't want any votes, so, you know.
Yeah, so this is why we've got to take the campaign out into the country.
You want to convince them? You really want this to happen?
Yeah, I really want it to happen. Look, it depends how serious you think Brexit is. I think Brexit is very bad for Britain. I think it is bad also for Europe. If, you know, most people by consensus, people will say this is the most important decision Britain has taken since the Second World War. Right, if it's that important, then it's your duty, if you really feel strongly about it, to do something about it.
And you can go back like this, just with a new vote. You could go back.
Well, it won't. It'll be a different referendum, obviously, if it gets to a referendum, because you could decide it through a general election. Right? But my view is that there may well be a situation when the present British Prime Minister brings forward her proposition to Parliament. I think she may find it very hard to get that proposition agreed by Parliament, in which case there'll be gridlock, in which case you could have an election or you could have another referendum.
When you said very bad for Europe, it was also a wake-up call for Europe, Brexit, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's important to realise that some of the issues that gave rise to Brexit are felt all around Europe. It's just that the rest of Europe didn't have referendums. But this is why, in my view, the most sensible thing is for Britain to stay, but in a reformed European system, where Europe is also taking account of people's anxieties over things like immigration and the state of the economy and so on.
What do you think of Emmanuel Macron? Does he profit from Brexit? Here he stands out as the European leader everybody wants to see.
Yeah, no, he's made a remarkable entry onto the world stage, and it's doing France a lot of good. And as you know, and can feel here, there's a great deal of positive sentiment towards France.
Do you think that Brexit is a good context for him, in a way?
Well, I think...
In a sense?
Look, I think short term, of course, the contrast between a France that's moving forward and Britain debating Brexit is quite stark, let's say. But in the long term, no, it's bad for France, for Britain to leave. Because if Britain leaves Europe, you've done two things which are bad for Europe. You've taken one of the largest European economies out of Europe, and politically, you know, Britain, a bit like France, has real political weight in the world. So you take that weight off the European side, Europe becomes less powerful. And one of the reasons why Europe's so important today is the 21st century will see the dominant power in the West, the United States of America, and it's going to now find dominant powers in the East, China for sure, possibly India behind. So for Europe, if it wants to protect its interests and its values in this new geopolitics, it's got to be strong, it's got to be successful, and it's got to stick together.
Right, I think that's what Emmanuel Macron stands for, isn't it?
Well, he's right. I mean, and it's obvious, actually.
You need to convince the British people.
Yeah, that's right.
Many people are very skeptical when they think about Europe.
Sure, they are, but, you know, it's possible to be skeptical about Europe. I mean, look, I'm skeptical about aspects of Europe. You know, there's not many European politicians that aren't skeptical about aspects of Brussels.
There's lots of populism, you know.
Yeah, of course. But the question in the end is it better to change the system or scrap it? And in the world that's developing...
And you're scrapping it right now.
If we retreat, if Britain gets out of Europe, it's leaving the biggest commercial market in the world, to which we are joined, you know, physically by the Channel Tunnel and commercially through the single market, and it's leaving the biggest political union, or the strongest political union in the world, in this new geopolitical environment. Now,
but why now, Tony Blair? Because you've always been a strong European. You've always been convinced that Europe should be strong.
Yeah, so I think now...
You're campaigning right now, when I see you.
Yeah, no, I am, because I believe passionately this is going to be damaging for the values that we hold dear. I mean, I think one of the things we've got to realise in Europe, not just Britain, is that the 21st century will see a contestation of our value system. You know, we take for granted that the Westerners are supreme in the world. We're not. This world is changing. And therefore, if you weaken Europe, which I think is, you know, frankly, given the situation in the United States of America, it's even more important for Europe to stay true to its values, strong, capable, and able to exert influence and power in this new geopolitics. So, yeah, of course, I'm campaigning because I think this is going to, you know, future generations.
You're going back into UK politics in a way?
No, I'm not back in the front line of politics in that sense, but look, it's a democracy. You know, you're free to speak, and I want to speak on this because I think it's so important. And I also want to, you know, through my institute now, we're developing a whole policy platform that's about how you prevent ideas for the future that are ideas of change, that will distribute equality, distribute wealth and opportunity much more equally. And I think it's only by presenting that strong policy platform for the future that you're going to push back the populism of the left, which is basically anti-business, and the populism of the right, which is basically anti-immigrant. So this is, you know, I think this is, and Brexit is part of that bigger battle, if you like, as well.
You made a lot of reforms in the 90s. What piece of advice would you give Emmanuel Macron today?
The single biggest challenge is not knowing what you should do, but actually doing it. It's the challenge of executive capacity to get the job done. And, you know, what I learned in my first term in office, I was often, you know, at the level of the vision, I could get it right, but at the level of the execution, it wasn't, the policies weren't working in the way they should. In my second term, I kind of learnt much more, and I focused really on how you make the structural change necessary to make your public services, your private sector, your economy work more effectively. And I think, you know, the challenge that you always face, he's got absolutely the right vision for France, but the challenge always will be, how do you actually deliver it?
What do you think of the agreements that Emmanuel Macron had with Theresa May on migrants and the €50 million check from the UK? Do you think that the UK should do more for migrants and more specifically for the minors who are trying to go back to go to the UK to join their families?
Yeah, this is one of these impossible problems. I actually dealt with this in government, of course, when I think Nicolas Sarkozy was your interior minister in France. We came to an arrangement there, which was a fair arrangement, in a situation where there's no real good outcome. There's just, less bad outcomes. So we should just manage this between the two countries. I mean, I understand the problems France has in dealing with the situation there, but you've got to understand from our point of view as well, we're also trying to control our immigration flows.
Because here you were talking about minors who actually want to join the UK.
And I understand that it's very difficult, but part of the reason why we need an approach on immigration that recognises the broader context of refugees and migrant flows is because there's no very easy solution when you get people that are in a desperate situation for whom you feel very sorry, but on the other hand you don't want to create a magnet so you get more and more people coming.
Donald Trump is in Davos. Tony Blair, what do you think? Do you think he could start a trade war?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there are risks, but I think at the moment, at any rate, it's being kept within boundaries that you can understand. And so I think, there are issues that he's obviously got elected on a mandate to shift the terms of trade somewhat. You've got to hope that this is done in a way that doesn't disturb the essential elements of international commerce.
Doesn't it?
I think it hasn't so far, is what I would say.
He said that Palestinians disrespected the US because they refused to meet with Mike Pence. What's your take on this?
Look, I still work very closely on the Israeli-Palestinian issue. In my view, the only solution is still a two-state solution, a secure state of Israel, an independent sovereign state of Palestine, the borders of which will be based on 67 lines and land swaps. And in the end, as a result of the Jerusalem decision, there's obviously a lot of anxiety on the Palestinian side. But I think we've got to wait for the plan that I know the Americans are working on at the moment. They're going to put that plan forward, and then we'll see, frankly.
Yeah, you optimistic?
Look, I think you've got an enormous opportunity if we approach this from the point of view of the region as a whole, because the Middle East region is changing radically. There are real strategic interests the Israelis and the Arabs have in common, but they won't be able to get to the right balance of partnership in the region unless there's a resolution of the Palestinian question. So I think there's an opportunity, but you have to wait and see what the Americans put forward.
About Syria, the United Nations just made a fresh push to start Syrian peace talks. Jean-Yves Le Drian, the French defense minister, said the talks are the last hopes for reaching a political solution. Are they?
Well, it certainly looks like that. Although, frankly, if they fail, you've got to carry on trying. But the situation in Syria, I think, is really, really dire. And, we shouldn't forget that even as we're thinking that the peace negotiations going on, people are still dying there, and they're still being treated in an abominable way.
That's also what he says. And Bashar is not required to leave anymore, is he?
No, but the problem is, there's a longer discussion for another day, but I think the truth of the matter is you can have a transition in Syria where, whether we like it or we don't, the Assad regime plays a part, but the long-term future of Syria has got to be towards a different and more democratic form of government.
Thank you so much, Tony Blair.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for watching. Stay with us on France 24.